Why do you want parents to be able to hit their children?
We do not want parents to be able to hit their children, and the law as it stands very clearly says that. You touched earlier on the difference between a hit and a smack, and I think that's a very important distinction which is carried in the law already. So it allows reasonable chastisement, which is actions which result in no more than a transitory reddening of the skin, and anything that's more than that would be considered violence and abuse, and that parent would be liable to investigation and prosecution for assault. But there's a world of difference between hitting a child in that way, losing your temper and striking a child, and reasonable chastisement, which parents use from time to time, taking your child aside, giving them a tap on the hand and saying no, and then, in the context of a loving home, like your previous caller said, taking them aside afterwards and explaining their actions and affirming them. There's a real difference between these two things, and the idea that the state should step in and criminalise perfectly ordinary, normal, loving parents for using these mild actions, it's something that's quite preposterous, and I think a lot of people in Wales and the rest of the UK think it's too far.
Doesn't it send a confusing message, though, to children? Because their mums and dads are apparently the people that love them the most in life, and their mums and dads say, oh, don't be violent, don't hit your brother, don't do this, don't that. And then suddenly a parent will use physical punishment on them. It's a very confusing message, isn't it?
Well, I think parents would say that, part of being a loving parent is setting those clear boundaries and discipline.
But you can set the boundaries without hitting the child.
Sure. I think smacking, from what we hear anecdotally, is something that's used when children are at a young age. The example that's often used is if a child is doing something which is dangerous. When I was a child, apparently I had a fascination with bar fireplaces, and I kept consistently putting my fingers through the bar to try and touch this hot thing. And, when I was 2 or 3 years old, my mum, I'm not going to understand my mum's communication when she's saying to me, don't do that because it will result in a burn to your finger, which will be painful for several days. But if she takes me aside and taps me in the hand and says no, that effectively communicates the danger to me and prevents what's potentially a very hurtful injury for the child. So in these limited circumstances with young children, I think parents should be able to use that as a method of discipline. And of course, parents use many, many different methods as children grow older, and they'll use the naughty step and withdrawal of privileges, and these things are effective too. But there's no evidence to suggest that a mild tap on the hand or the back of the legs at a young age does any harm to a child. And that's something which the Welsh Government was very clear about in the evidence it took. In its consultation paper, it said there was unlikely to be any evidence that a light and infrequent smack does any harm to a child. So if that's the case, then we don't see how the government can justify criminalising parents for those actions. And if the Welsh Government wants to communicate that it doesn't like smacking and parents shouldn't use it, then they can do that through an educational campaign or civil enforcement or other things. But taking parents to the courts, making the police investigate perfectly good, normal families for actions which most people would think are quite a normal part of parenting is much too far.